Welcome to Sports Geek. On this week's episode, I dive into our digital to dollars process. Know your audience.
Welcome to Sports Geek, the podcast built for sports digital and sports business professionals. And now, here's your host who is working with sports teams around the world, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. Yes, my name is Sean Callanan. You can find me on a multitude of platforms. The easiest way to find me is at sportsgeekhq.com or via Twitter at Sean Callanan. At SportsGeek will find me. You'll find me on most internet platforms. Most of you hopefully have connected with me on LinkedIn, Sean Callanan. If I haven't connected with you as yet, my apologies. But please, if you do reach out, let me know that you listen to the podcast. But as always, you can find everything Sports Geek at sportsgeekhq.com. So this episode is going to be a little bit different. I've been tossing and debating whether to do a series on digital to dollars and the workshops. I know I have failed in my promise to write a book. And there's a number of reasons for that. Writing books are hard. Getting the time to get them done are hard. And also things like work and client requirements and running your own esports team get in the way of doing that. So what we've actually been doing is running workshops for digital to dollars. I just haven't had the time and headspace to put pen to paper as such. So sort of like Bill Simmons from The Ringer, who no longer writes and is now doing his second book of basketball in podcast form, I thought I would do digital to dollars in podcast form and give you a little bit of an insight into how the process works, who it's for, how it could work for you, some of the customizations that there are, and the different way it can be delivered, and why you would want to implement it. So that's pretty much what's going to be the process in this podcast. It's going to give you an insight into what happens in the workshops and some of those things. Hopefully we'll pique your interest. If it piques your interest, please reach out to me, Sean at sportsgeekhq.com. Before I jump into this, thank you to those of you who have signed up at Patreon. You can go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon, Patreon, to show your support for all the sports business content we produce across podcasts and newsletters. But let's get into it. Episode 1, know your audience as part of our digital to dollars process. So what are you getting? What are you getting in the digital to dollars process for know your audience? At its heart for this module, it's analysis of your fans and getting an understanding of your fans because it sets the foundation for everything. These workshops came out of the work that we did, which in the content space and in helping teams review what they were doing from a content point of view, which is the next episode. And normally that's a starting point. Normally it's a starting point of, let's look at all the content, what worked, what didn't work. Whereas starting with the audience is super important. One, to test some theories of what does your team think your audience is, what it actually is, but then also get opinions from multiple people in your business to understand their different needs and perspectives on your audiences. So for me, I've had lots of really good discussions with the people in the data space. It sets the foundation for everything. It sets the foundation for digital. It sets the foundation for ticketing, membership, commercial partnerships and the like. So that's the goal. The goal is to come out of the Know Your Audience workshop knowing who are your key audiences, who are the audiences you didn't quite know a lot about, what are the audiences, what we would call audiences of opportunity, what can you look to tackle in the next 6 to 12 months. That's the key thing. And what does the data tell us? And so we'll dive in a little bit about what the different types of data there is. But it's, what does the data tell us about our fans? Rather than we can start moving away from some of those assumptions and guesses and gut work, which is still valid, but we sort of want to validate as much as we can with data. So the key thing for this this workshop in particular, this is the workshop that I do really fight really hard so you get a wide audience to. By what I mean by that is I really want a lot of different people from the business, from the sports business. And so this workshop works either for a league that's looking at its overall fan base, or a league that wants to then implement it to all the teams, or ideally, and this is where we've done most of the work, is with an individual team. So what you're looking at is what does that, who do you want to invite to this workshop? So the obvious one is the people who work in the data space. So whether it's people who are working on your CRM project, that are the holders of your CRM, that manage it, people in charge of ticketing or membership, selling of season tickets, all about getting cheeks in the seats. They're very much in data and audiences a lot of the time. Also, people in marketing that are pushing out campaigns to different segments. And it's important for them to turn up. And then also your digital folk that are producing a lot of the content on these platforms that's actually giving us a lot of information about the different audiences. I think that's really important as well to have the digital folk there, because identifying different audiences will actually change tact in the following modules around knowing your content and knowing your distribution. And then last, and again, this is another one that I really encourage to the point of fighting, is to get the commercial folk to be turning up to this one. Because what we need to do is to make sure what they're putting out in market, and the audiences that they're promising sponsors, or the audiences that the sponsors are wanting, we need that information to be filtered back to the wider team. We need the digital folk to know that. We need the data and the ticketing folk to know that. So it's really just about getting a broad depth of knowledge across the team of what our audiences are and what they're doing is really critical, and getting some of those conversations around the different perspectives. So the different perspectives is sort of my wheelhouse. I've often joked that I've played digital divorce counsellor, because the view of an audience from a commercial point of view and a digital point of view can be vastly, vastly different. Ticketing and membership, the offer that you're pushing out to someone to buy a ticket is very different to the offer that you're putting out for someone to buy a membership or a season ticket. And then also, what does growth look like? It's very easy to keep serving your old fans, your rusted-on fans, your fans that love everything you do, but what do you need to do? And is there an opportunity to attract new fans? So there's some of the things that we will look at in the why of the workshop. Why are we doing this? Well, we want to come up with these different audiences. We don't want to just say our audience are Cowboys fans or Packers fans or Magpie fans. We want to be able to dive in. What does the young fan look like? What does the family audience look like? What does the older generation fan base look like? And start giving them some numbers around those pieces, because then it's going to start framing what we're going to do in everything else, like I said before, from a digital point of view, from a ticketing campaign, membership campaign point of view, and also what offers we can put back to our partners from a commercial point of view. So it's really diving in on what are the tools. And so the how of this workshop is looking at the tools that you have access to. And a lot of the time, I think, the common joke when I'm talking to people about CRM is, where are they on their CRM journey? Because everyone is developing it, and it's a bit like when you're a developer. So I was a developer many years ago, and you'd always be waiting or trying to hesitate to push a product live because you're never happy with it. And I sort of feel like that's every CRM manager. You're never quite happy with it because it's always improving, or you hope it's always improving. But no matter where you are on your CRM journey, whether you've started, whether you haven't started, whether you're starting to get some useful data into your CRM, you want to make sure that those insights that you are gaining are being shared to different parts of your team, that your digital team know that, especially and then especially your commercial team. So one of the things that we do as part of this workshop is dive into the social media analytics. right? Because the CRM folk have the data. They have their data and they can produce their reports. But what we want to do is validate some of those audiences against the social media analytics that are there, because they give a different skew and a different behavioural and attitudinal analysis of your fan base. So we've been diving into Facebook for many years now and seeing, and it's very, it's pleasing, it's exciting, I think is probably a better word, as a marketer, to see what Facebook knows about your fans. It's a little bit scary as a user, knowing what data Facebook has on what you like and where you go and what your tendencies are. But as a marketer, which is, if you listen to this podcast, I'm assuming you're a marketer, we can embrace that. And so it's some of the insights and some of the light bulb moments that happen in workshops. And it's really hard to do this in a broad general sense for a podcast, which is part of the reason I was umming and ahhing, because a lot of it is in the when you start diving into the data on what the really killer insight is. But some of the things that we have found when diving into this kind of data, whether it's using Facebook to analyze who's been going to your website, or using Facebook to analyze who's been consuming your content or who's been engaging on the page, what do those audiences look like? What does Facebook know about your fans that aren't engaging with you? So once we start slicing and dicing those audiences, we can start seeing where the growth opportunities are, where the focus potentially could be or should be. And you can do this across multiple social media analytics tools. So Facebook has been far and above the leader in capturing data. And I think it used to be really good from a sizing point of view. You used to be able to do a lot of sizing. It would tell you the exact numbers. Now that's not as easy as it once was, because they've made changes where they don't exactly give you those sizings anymore. But it does give you some really good insights on who are your fans, who's engaging, who's watching videos, who's visiting your website, who's going to particular parts of your website. Again, this comes back to, if you're building out a website, the better structure you have on the naming conventions of everything in your website will make it easy for you to do some analysis from a data point of view of your visitors. And then the same goes for Google, because it has a different intent in what it's searching and a different matching criteria. The data that Google has is, again, it's getting very similar, because everyone has Google Analytics on their website and everyone has Facebook Pixels on their website. So they're getting very similar. I think the difference with Facebook is that it is getting what you like, whereas Google has a lot of what you're searching for. So it has a bit more intent, whereas Facebook is a little bit more behavioral. So the key thing around the workshop is starting to identify these different audiences. And that's the key thing. So looking at, and again, please don't take this podcast as this is the whole workshop. This is, I guess, a preview of the workshop, because usually throughout this process, it is very much a collaborative session. Yes, there's little parts of the workshop that I go into lecture mode and sort of dive into a few things. There's a bit of the workshop that is a bit show and tell, where we start diving into Facebook Business Manager and using the audience builder to build out some audiences, to have some fun in there. But it's very much that back and forth of who is your key audience? What do you think? We have a little bit of a game show style version of it, where we get people to guess what they think the numbers are. Now, the data people should be on game and should know their numbers, but it is really interesting to get that feedback from your commercial folk or your digital folk, those kind of things. So some of the outcomes are definitely identification of audience segments that you currently have, and then potential, growth segments. Also starting to set some audience KPIs for your digital and data team, right? So a lot of times we will identify an audience we would call them, your audience of opportunity. We'll identify an audience that you're not talking to enough, and what can you do to change that? And it might be simply a different piece of content that is tailored for that piece, that audience, or a particular platform when you're looking at no distribution that you're going to use more to connect and engage that audience. And then also decide which of the audiences are worth the effort. So looking at an audience and understanding, will they buy a ticket? Will they buy a subscription? Will they buy merchandise? Is it worth us putting in that extra effort? And then what audiences will offer growth? So that's where we start sizing an audience and saying, here's the 50,000, 100,000, 200,000 people we're engaged with, but Facebook says here's 300,000 or 400,000 more that we could engage with, whether it be in this segment, in this market. So it could be geographical, or just a different demographic segment that you might be looking at. And then the other one is, you get to define your digital cheer squad. It's one of the things that it's a phrase that I've used a long time now. Having a really well-defined digital cheer squad that you can go to get a like, to get a bump, to rally around what you're doing online. Just defining that, giving them a name, having it as common knowledge across the organisation is so valuable. So you're not just calling them, as I said before, it's just your fans. So when you start creating these personas and you start naming them, it makes it far easier for you to start producing content for them, producing events for them, producing products for them, producing ticket products for them, and also pitching those different digital cheer squads to your sponsors. A couple of recommendations if you sort of want to dive into this topic a little bit more. I always point to my chat with Andy Perelman from the Pittsburgh Penguins, episode 213. She talked a lot about understanding fans and the emotional side of the fans, the behavior, and trying to understand the behavior of them. If you're in data and digital, it's a really good listen. If you're looking for a book, you can look up a book that Andy did recommend on that podcast, Everybody Lies. I thought it's a fascinating listen. I did it on Audible. Fascinating listen on big data, new data, and what people say on the internet might not exactly be what the actions they do. So it's a little bit of a be wary when analysing a lot of this data. Another one, if you definitely want to get into the world of CRM and sports, is another former guest, Fiona Green's Winning with Data, is another really good book for someone looking to, especially if you are really diving in on your CRM journey. The key outcomes for this workshop is to get your teams across and have that shared knowledge of all your audiences across teams. I think the biggest one, with I always have that commercial lens and on things is a lot of the times we've run the workshop, we've had commercial folk in the room, their eyes light up, one, with access to things like Facebook Business Manager and being able to just dive in and say, how many of our fans, like Pepsi or like Coca-Cola or drive a Ford? They find that stuff fascinating and they haven't been given the keys to that type of data. So giving them a snippet of that or being able to build out profiles like that for them is super valuable. But then also reverse engineering what some of the sponsors are coming to them for. So, we want to do this. We're an education business that's looking for school leavers. And you're like, well, okay, now we can look at what the data says of what we actually have got in that segment. What is the opportunity there? How can we help tailor that pitch for that sponsor, but also be realistic about what we're pitching to them? Because we don't want to end up in that spot where they've promised, the total audience when really it's only a segment of your audience. So if that's a common, if it's a problem, if it's a common problem, if it's something that you're finding that there's a mismatch between what's sold and it's missing the mark, or you're pitching out campaigns and they're not quite hitting, it could be, and it most likely would be, that the foundations are not quite steady, and you haven't actually got those audiences locked in. So how do we go about this? How does the Know Your Audience workshop work? So it's step one of the Digital Dollars process. You can do it as a standalone workshop. So the good thing about the Digital Dollars process is all the modules can break down and be done individually. If you're starting out, it obviously makes sense to do audience, then content, then distribution, so then we can understand what your value is and then develop a pitch. But if you just want to have a refresher for your team on developing some audiences for the season ahead, identifying your audiences of opportunity, like what could we do in the next season for a new audience that we've never spoken to before, and how can we get a partner involved with that? What content will we develop? That all starts with, first of all, identifying the audience. Oh, we're not talking to, the teenage audience, or we're not talking to the family audience. We're not talking to females, young females in some instances. So it's like those audiences, when you start looking at your data, they just start popping up, and you can do nothing with them. But for mine, you're silly to leave them, because they're fans that are putting their hand up, that are engaged, despite the fact that you're not engaged with them. So that can be done as a half-day workshop on site with follow-up and support to complete the audience profiles for the season ahead, and then that dovetails into the Know Your Content workshop, which I'll go through in a follow-up podcast. You can also do it as an online training piece. So we can break down that workshop and do it as online sessions via Zoom. As much as I would like to travel and do all of them on site, I still do a lot of work via Zoom with meeting with people. And again, it can work in that same way, working through your audiences, working through with your different departments to identify those key audiences, with that same follow-up and support to complete the audience profiles for the season ahead. And then the other option is, if you're running a conference or maybe a league conference where you've got all the teams coming in, or even you just want to have all the teams jump on an online session, webinar style thing, I can do it as a Know Your Audience keynote and sort of give some of the highlight items here that I gave in this podcast, and get people thinking about what they should be doing in the audience space and how they should be tackling it from a data point of view, with some takeaways. So my takeaway, or my homework, and this is an experiment. My homework from this episode is, I want you to dive in to Facebook Business Manager, dive into your audiences, and find an audience you're not engaged with that you probably should be engaged with, which is these audiences of opportunity. Now, it's tough to do without diving in and going through the full process. But really, the way that I define it is, what alternate audience, not your key audiences, should you be engaging that you're not? Is it a specific demographic segment? Is it gender-based? Or is it geolocational-based? Is it something to do with people in the stadium or outside the stadium? Dive in a little bit deeper, and I would love to hear what audiences you think you should be engaging better. Send me an email, sean@sportsgeekhq.com. I'd love to hear what the different audiences you think you should be engaging, and maybe then the harder question is, why aren't you? And the answer could be resources. That's fine. That's usual. But what is the upside? What's the upside of engaging that audience? Ask yourself that. If you can send me an email, that'd be great. I'd love to hear from you. If you'd like to know more or interested in the workshop or the digital to dollars process, send me an email, Sean@sportsgeekhq.com. There's more info on the Digital Dollars website, digitaldollars.com. You can find out more about that. And as I said, the process itself can be broken down into individual modules, can be run for a league, can be run for a team, has a lot of flexibility in what it can do. The goal of the process overall is to help your commercial team sell more digital assets and effectively drive more revenue from your digital. And so that is fixing the problem of understanding what your digital is valued at, but then more importantly, and I think this is more important than the value, is learning how to sell it properly and learning how to convince sponsors to pay for digital, both from an execution point of view, a IP value point of view, and a results point of view, because I don't think it's one. So that's it. That's episode 1. Looking at the clock, the goal was to get it under 30 minutes, and I did so. Hopefully found that insightful. Digitaltodollars.com is where you can find out more info. Like always, you can stay in touch with our newsletters, sportsgeekhq.com/SGN for Sports Geek News. If you get Sports Geek News every week and you appreciate it, I'd really appreciate it if you pass it on to a colleague. I've set a goal to double the list size of Sports Geek News, which is a big effort. But if you find value in it, I'd love it for you to share it with friends or tell people to sign up. And if you're interested in esports, we now have a fortnightly newsletter at sgesports.com. So if you're hoping to keep seeing a lot of esports news in Sports Geek News, well, we are moving them across to SG Esports and keeping a focus there as Gravitas is going to kick off its second year. January 31 is when we kick off the season in the OPL. So follow that at Gravitas GG. Also, as I'm making these call-outs at the end, send in your questions for the Q&A episodes. They're going to be back soon. Simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/questions to have your question featured on the show. Each episode, I answer 3 questions from Sports Geek listener audience, because I know my audience and I do appreciate what you're doing. And lastly, if you haven't, please check out our Patreon campaign. It helps keep the podcast up and rolling, keep the newsletters coming out, and you can join that as a personal patron for as little as $4 a month, or if you are a sports technology, sports marketing firm that wants to reach the Sports Geek audience, and I might say they are fine folk, exceptionally good looking, intelligent, and for a lot of them are working at executive roles across the world of sport in the USA, Europe, and Australia, and the Asia-Pac region. So if you want to reach that audience, you can do so by becoming a silver or a gold supporter of the Patreon campaign. Simply go to sportsgeekhq.com/Patreon. And that's it from me. Until next week, my name is Sean Callanan, and you've been listening to Sports Geek.
Join Sports Geek Nation access to exclusive Slack and Facebook groups with regular Q&A sessions with Sean Callanan. Go to sportsgeeknation.com to join. Need help with your digital rate card? Not sure how to price your assets? Is there a disconnect between digital and commercial? That is where Sean works best, in digital divorce counselor mode. Book a time for a call with Sean to discuss the Sports Geek process. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/phone call.
Go to sportsgeekhq.com for more sports digital marketing resources.